Adobe's made some improvements to the timeline inside of Flash Professional CC, and what I'd like to do is show those to you now. Here we have a series of PNG files all stacked on frame 1, and if we look in the library, we can see that this is essentially a sequence that we want to be able to animate. One other thing that I'll point out before we get to the timeline, by default inside of Flash Professional CC, you'll notice if you come over to the Bitmap Properties dialog box, Allow Smoothing is automatically selected. That's actually a pretty big time saver. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, but what we want to do is essentially distribute each of these images onto separate keyframes. That wasn't possible in previous versions of Flash. So how do you do this in Flash Professional CC? Well, what you want to do is select the objects that you want to distribute. You want to select them here on the stage. So I'm just going to click and drag a marquee around all of those objects. With all of them selected, you can right-click or control-click, and in the contextual menu, you can choose Distribute to Keyframes. Now, in this case, I wouldn't necessarily select the first image within this sequence, but because they're stacked on top of one another, it's so hard to see which one's the first one, I just selected them all. But the disadvantage of selecting them all and choosing Distribute to Keyframes is you're going to be removing everything from keyframe 1, which in this case is fine. But if I press Enter or Return on the keyboard, I can see the animation. So I was able to successfully take each of those elements and put each of those elements on their own individual keyframes. And again, that's a brand new feature inside of Flash Professional CC. It's the Distribute to Keyframes option, and you can distribute symbols or bitmaps. Something else that I want to show you, if we come over to this document here, owl.fla, we can see that we have multiple butterflies within this document. And in the library, you can see that we have a blue butterfly. If for some reason you decide that you want to have the blue butterfly instead of these pink butterflies, what you can do is use the swap symbol command. Again, in previous versions of Flash, you would have to do this 4 times. Well, in Flash Professional CC, what you can do is select each of the butterflies that you want to swap out with the blue butterfly. So I'm just holding down the Shift key as I click on each of these butterflies. You can then come over to the Properties panel, and you'll see the same old Swap button. When you click it, you can choose the symbol you want to swap it with, which in this case is the blue butterfly. When you click OK, you'll see that all the instances are updated. So again, that's a brand new feature inside of Flash Professional CC. Finally, they've made some minor modifications in terms of how you can interact with multiple layers. For example, if you wanted to turn multiple layers into guides, you have that ability. Before, you would have to do it on a layer-by-layer basis. But here, if I select multiple layers, you can right-click or control-click, and you'll notice in the contextual menu, there's a guide option, and you can easily toggle each of these layers to a guide. Of course, I don't want them to be a guide, so I'll go ahead and toggle them back by deselecting the guide option. That same option also works for masks now as well. Additionally, there's some other small modifications. For example, if you have 2 folders expanded and you want to collapse both of those folders, you can simply select both folders. So I'm going to select this artwork folder, then I'm going to hold down the Command key or the Control key to select the other folder. Then you can right-click or control-click on the selected folder layers, and in the contextual menu, you can choose Collapse Folders, and both of those folders will collapse. Again, in earlier versions, you could either expand or collapse all the folders, or you could expand or collapse individual folders. But here, you have the ability to control what folders will be expanded or collapsed. So some minor improvements, but welcomed improvements that will ultimately make you more productive inside of Flash.